Hi again and welcome back. In this video, we'll be looking at Greek vocabulary that has to do with the temple and the synagogue. There are two basic words for temple in ancient Greek. One is honaos, which means sanctuary or temple, and the other is tahieron. Note in tahieron the breathing mark on the first vowel. It's a rough breathing, and that's not a diphthong. The iota and the epsilon are pronounced separately, so it's hieron. This is the word from which we get words in English like hierarchy, which originally had to do with rule, archy, by the priests or the temple, hier. Temples in the ancient world were everywhere. Although they didn't look quite like we imagine, they tended to be painted all over, very bright colors, and where there was enough money, instead of being painted bright colors, they would be paneled inside and out with brightly colored stone paneling and marble paneling, often marble colored like deep green and orange. And so it was a much more colorful, much richer environment in these temples than we often think when we see the ruins that are just white or gray because the paint and the marble has disappeared over the centuries. Temples also weren't really equivalent to churches because they weren't the place where people gathered for congregational worship of any kind. The temple itself was usually reserved for the priest, and the sacrifice actually took place outside the temple, usually at an outdoor altar of some sort. These temples could be huge, but they could also be very, very small. And in most first century cities, there were temples scattered everywhere, many of which were smaller than houses. There's a whole family of words that are related to hieron. One of these is ha-hierius, which means priest. This is interesting because it is an example of a class of nouns that use the -us ending for a person who performs the action related to the stem. So if hiera has to do with temples or the sacred, then the hieraios is going to be somebody who does temple stuff, somebody who does sacred work, or a temple worker. The archieraios is the high priest, and notice we form this just by putting the arch prefix in front of hieraios, and arch comes over to English as arch, like arch enemy. So if you can remember that arch prefix means chief or head, the most important one, then archieraios is high priest, or sometimes it's translated chief priest. The adjective hieros, hiere, hieron is actually the origin of this whole family of words. It's an adjective meaning holy or sacred, and tahieron actually means the holy thing or the holy place. This is a classic example of a substantive adjective, in this case a neuter singular substantive adjective, tahieron. And in fact, many neuter nouns are formed from adjectives like this. Initially, the substantive adjective in the neuter singular is used for some particular object, and then over time, that substantive adjective becomes so familiar to people as the label for that thing that it becomes the noun for that thing. And this is how we got tahieron for temple. Approaching tahieron required that one be in the right state, and that state was often referred to as katharos, kathare, or katharon, being clean or pure, in a ritual sense rather than in a hygienic sense. The opposite of that would be, using the alpha privative prefix, to be akatharos, akathere, akatharon, unclean, impure or dirty. Now, both katharos and akatharos can be used in an ordinary sense for being clean or dirty, but they also have this religious sense of being in a fit ritual state to enter the sanctuary or not being in that fit ritual state. Katharidzo, derived from the same root, means I purify or I clean. Similarly, luo means I wash, and derived from that we have talutron, which is the act of washing or bathing, or what is sometimes referred to more fancily as ablution. We had a strong distinction in the ancient world between what is holy and what is profane or common or not holy. Hagios, hagie, hagion, is the main adjective for the idea of holiness, and it meant that something was set aside for normal use and reserved for the use of priests in sacrifice or other temple rituals. Hagiadzo means I make something holy, and this is the word that's often translated sanctify in English translations of the New Testament. The opposite of being hagios is to be koinos, koine, koinon, common, profane, or not holy. It's not necessarily a bad thing to be koinos. It just means that you're not hagios. You're not set aside for sacred ritual use. You're just an ordinary thing. Not fit then for worship purposes, but fine for everyday life. Here are some of the activities that went on in and around the temple. He liturgia means generally temple service or ritual service, and this is the term from which we get our English word liturgy. Hetusia was the primary form that liturgia took. This means sacrifice. The verb related to thusia is thusiadzo, which means I offer a sacrifice. He haorte is a festival. And again, notice the rough breathing mark on the first vowel. The festivals, hai haortai, were usually the only break that people had from work, because in the Greek and Roman worlds, there wasn't a regular Sabbath the way there was in Jewish society. And so, in place of regular Sabbaths, religious festivals scattered through the month served as semi-regular breaks from work. He Pascha is one of the chief haortai of the Jews, and this is Passover. There are several specific words that have to do with offering sacrifice. Ta thusiasterion is the altar, the platform on top of which sacrifices were offered. And notice that this is constructed by adding thusia, sacrifice, to terion, which is a suffix that often denotes the place where something happens. Drink offerings were often made of haoinos, which we've learned before means wine. But animal offerings were common too, and so we might offer taprobaton, which means a sheep or goat. And in the plural, taprobata means a herd or flock, or plural herds or flocks. Probaton was really a general term for any small herd animal. Ta arnion was specifically a lamb, and it was tahaima, the blood of the offering, whether it was a probaton or an arnion. It was tahaima that was often seen as having ritual power, both in Israel's temple and in temple cults generally in the ancient world. Prosphero was often used to mean I present or I offer, in the sense of presenting or offering a sacrifice of some kind. And you can see that it's derived from phero, meaning I carry or lift. Didomi, similarly was used often to denote giving a sacrifice, even though it is a much more general word. And derived from didomi, we have tadoron, which could mean a gift of any kind, but it could also be used for a sacrifice, which was often thought of as a gift. And here again we see in the picture on the right a young bull being led to the sacrifice to be ritually slaughtered by the altar, and some of the blood offered to the deity. It's important to notice what we've seen with several terms in this video, and that is that religious vocabulary was often actually common language, just used in a religious context. And so we need to be careful about assigning specialized meanings to words just because they can sometimes be used in those specialized contexts. This becomes important in the New Testament, where sometimes we overread common words and inject a whole lot of specialized ritual meaning into them where it's really not justified.